All right, this is chapter 17, section 1, and it's on the Linnaean system of classification. The key concept here is that organisms can be classified based upon physical similarities. Code word mango. All right, Linnaeus developed a scientific naming system that's still used today. Um, so when I say the scientific naming system, um, when you think about all of life, from plants like this tree, to all the different animals that might be in this picture, to even the humans in this house, the question is, how do we name these things so that they make sense to everybody? So that, a scientist that's working in, Houston, Texas can communicate with, some scientist over in China, to make sure that there's some sort of common naming system. So this tree right here, it's commonly called the white oak. Now, it makes sense, sort of, the name of it, I guess, but, there could be, sometimes 5 different names for a certain animal or a certain tree, and so, but however, there's only one specific scientific name, and I'll do my best to pronounce it, Quercus alba. Um, Okay, so we'll get into the scientific naming system, but just a little bit of vocabulary. A taxon is referring to a group of organisms in that classification system. So just something to kind of keep in mind as we go through. Okay, so that name that I mentioned for the white oak, the scientific name, it comes about from what's called binomial nomenclature. So bi meaning two, and then nomial referring to naming. These are using Latin words, which is why they sound kind of goofy to us. Um, and these scientific names are always written in italics, and there's 2 parts to it: the genus name and the species. Um, in a couple slides, I'm going to remind you what a genus is and a species, but a species is the most specific, and genus is a little more broad. So humans were called Homo sapiens, Homo being our genus, sapiens being our species. Okay, the first name is always going to be the genus. That goes first. And then your second name is always going to be the species. Okay. So I'll kind of tie all this together as I keep going forward. Oops. Code word ice. So a genus is going to include one or more physically similar species, and again, it's the first part of the scientific name. So typically, genus is just referring to animals that look generally the same. So you could think of genus as like this owl down here. Genus referring to all of the owls, whereas the species, the second part of the name, is referring to this specific owl. The owl that has this specific characteristics. Um, if you have species that are in the same genus, they're going to be more closely related, and the genus name is always capitalized, which you can see right there. And then the species descriptor is that second part of the name, and it's always lowercase, and it's never written alone. You never just say alba when you're referring to this owl. You're always going to say Tyoto alba. Okay. So again, these names help scientists communicate. Um, because if you use these common names like roly poly or something, some common names sound really similar. And again, some, like the roly poly, some people call it roly poly, some people call it pill bug, so bug, potato bug, and it gets to, I didn't know roly poly was called a potato bug. So, I'm talking to somebody who says potato bug and I'm saying roly poly, and it's like, what are we even talking about at this point? Whereas if you have one specific scientific name, we're all kind of on the same page. And these are examples of genus, species. Capitalized, lowercase. All right. As promised, these were the 7 different levels of Linnaeus' classification system. And it's not in here, but further on in the chapter, the word domain is a level above kingdom. So just kind of something to keep in mind. But technically, for Linnaeus, he just started at kingdom being the highest. And each level, so that the phylum is included in the kingdom. So as you can see, as you go down this diagram here, it gets more and more specific. So as you go from kingdom to species, it gets more and more specific. So up here at Kingdom Animalia, the name just referring to animals. And then you have Chordata, which is referring to all the animals that have, referring to animals that have backbones. And then you get into the class Mammalia, which is referring to mammals, so animals that produce milk from breasts. Then you get to the order Carnivora, which is referring to animals that eat meat, carnivores. And then the family Canidaea, which is kind of referring to, four-legged, dog-ish sized animals. Then the genus Canis, which includes things like the wolf, and other dogs, coyote, fox. But then specifically, you get the species Canis lupus. If you Harry Potter fans out there, Lupin, he would turn into a werewolf. So this is a wolf right here, hence lupus. That's where he gets his name from. Okay, so how can you remember this mess here? Because your STAR test wants you to know this. You can remember this acronym. Did King Philip come over for good soup? Where the first letter of each each word in this sentence represents each level of this. So D for domain, kingdom, phylum, yada yada yada. Code word hola. All right, so the Linnaean classification system does have limitations. It's not perfect. Linnaeus lived, back in the 1800s. So I mean, this was a long time ago. Back in the 1800s, we didn't have molecular evidence. DNA wasn't discovered until the middle of the 20th century. So, Linnaeus just kind of classified things based on physical similarities, based on what they looked like. So it's like, oh, these things all have 4 legs and kind of look the same. So we'll call them a family and call it Canidaea. But it's all, just kind of roughly speaking. And why I even bother to mention that is because just because organisms physically look similar, meaning just because, excuse me, just because all of these animals have 4 legs and sort of kind of look a little bit alike, doesn't mean that they're genetically related. Meaning that doesn't mean that they have an evolutionary relationship. It doesn't mean that their DNA, the bases that make up the DNA, your A, T, C, G, those sequence of letters, those collection of letters, it doesn't mean those are similar to each other necessarily, or that they had a common ancestor. Okay, and that'll do it for this video. And code word monkey.